Welcome to Just an Average Citizen podcast, the podcast created to help inform, educate, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. I'm so grateful you decided to join me today on this podcast. We've got a lot of great things to talk about, but before I go any further, I just have to give you a little quiz. You know, I'm a former public school teacher and I still homeschool my kids, so it's quiz time. Are you ready? What day is coming up? That's right. You got it. It is Election Day. Tuesday, November 7th is Election Day, and you need to make sure you make plans to show up to vote. If you haven't already taken advantage of early voting the last 2 weeks, I wanted to share a quick picture. We were able to use the early voting polling location at City Hall that was right across from where we were after City Council meeting on Thursday, and so it was really easy to show up and vote. I had my handy voter guide, and it made things go a lot faster than I was expecting. Those 14 amendments didn't stand a chance with me and all that knowledge I had come prepared to utilize as I voted through that ballot. And so if you haven't voted yet, you want to make sure you print out some of the information you need so you can know how to vote, because you will not be able to use your phone while you're voting. I wanted to be able to give those of you who have not voted yet an opportunity to see where the nearest location was for you on Tuesday to go to. It's from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and you want to make plans to go early, because we know how life happens. On typical days, you make plans and something interrupts it. So the earlier you can go, the better. Here's some great locations. So there's quite a few places to vote. Most of these are going to be at a church, so that will help make things a little easier. And of course, you can always go and vote at the Taylor County Plaza downtown near the courthouse. I did want to tell you some things to be watching for. You know, because I'm trying to keep this in a place where you can just get the information, I'm not going to talk a lot about what to vote for or what things we want to gauge to see if we're successful, because there's a lot of differing opinions, and I would love it for this to be a place where people can come and get information and make decisions based on what they've been told and informed about. So I did think this was something important to look at for this election. You know, there's different elections in different seasons. Obviously, the presidential election is one that most people show up for. Then there's the gubernatorial election, which I believe happened last year. And so November can have a varying degree of turnouts. And so I wanted to find one from 2019, which was also a constitutional amendment election only. There wasn't a whole lot else on the ballot. And we can see back then we had 78,843 registered voters, and we had a 9,500 turnout. We had about 9,500 people turn out to vote. So to me, that's a number I want to be watching. I was told in preparation for this election that it could be anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 turnout, and so that's what we're watching for. If we beat 10,000, then we know that people, I say beat, it's not a competition, but if we have more than 10,000 show up, and it's depending on the significance of how many more people we have showing up, when we know that we are making an impact and making sure people understand that their voices matter, and electing or showing up to vote at an election is one of the first and most simple ways you can make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. And so that is something I'm going to be watching for, just to see what our turnout is for this election season. The next thing I want to move into is some corrections I need to make about some things that I've said, because sometimes I need to clarify what I've said or actually just correct it. And I want you to know that as I move into being a source of information for you, I want you to know you can trust me to keep you up to date on what is going on, and that I'm human, I make mistakes, and as I make mistakes, I'll let you know so that you can make appropriate corrections if need to. The first correction I'm going to make is not really that big of a deal, but I do think it matters, just as I'm establishing trust with you, to know that I want to correct it and I want to be as accurate as possible. I've been talking about the Visual Arts Jury Board meeting, and I actually got one of the dates completely, it just left my brain. And so the first scheduled meeting was on September 26th, and it was canceled due to a lack of quorum. So they rescheduled it for Tuesday, October 3rd, and that was the first meeting where the public attended a Visual Arts Jury Board meeting ever. And because that was such an impactful experience for the board, they decided to table it and do more research until they rescheduled it the next week on Thursday, October 12th, for a special Visual Arts Jury Board meeting where they approved the statute and passed it on to the City Council, where 2 weeks later is where the council also accepted their recommendation for this statute for our storybook gardens. And so I don't think that really changes much, but I do want you to know that as I see things that have been said incorrectly, I'm going to correct them. The second clarification I need to make is one that happened with the Abilene-Taylor Venue District proposition on the ballot. It's not super complicated, but there are a lot of moving parts, and I'm not sure exactly how I stated it, so I'm just going to restate it to make sure I'm clear on what actually is going on. This is a venue district that has been in place for quite a while, and the district itself is not about money or a bond. It's just created so that they can increase the hotel tax by 2% for our area, and anyone who stays in a hotel, that money from the hotel, that 2% goes into this venue district and allows them to do some projects to help increase tourism in our area. And so because I am a normal, average citizen, I like to go and read order numbers and ordinances and the things that I find in the city packet. Or this is the agenda packet for the Abilene-Taylor County Events Venue District Board meeting on August 7th. I knew this is where I could go find it because this was going to be on the election and the ballot, and I knew that in the ballot they would give us the information. And so I found some interesting things, and I wanted to show you even how the process to verify what I knew. Now, I could have just watched the video and actually heard one of the gentlemen mention that the construction ready project would require $5 million. $2 million of that would be taken out on a revenue bond, which is the bond that is what's going to they're going to take out a bond in order to pay for the construction. They're not going to save up the money or save up the hotel occupancy taxes as they receive them. They're going to do a revenue bond. And let me look at this and show you a little bit more of what I'm talking about. So whereas in 2003, I'm reading from this packet information given through the packet. It says, in 2003, the Board of Directors declared a venue project, the planning, acquisition, establishment, development, construction, renovation, and or operation of the Frontier Texas, a museum and visitor center for transportation and Western heritage, improvements to the Taylor County Expo Center and Shotwell Stadium, such as paving the park area together with related infrastructure and related improvements. So that was in 2003. Well, then in 2004, the voters of the city of Abilene, Taylor County approved a single proposition authorizing the prior venue project and the imposition of a hotel occupancy tax at a maximum of 2% in the city and county for purposes of financing operating the prior venue project, which prior venue tax became effective April 1st, 2004. So in 2004, the district issued its Abilene-Taylor County Event Venue District Hotel Occupancy Tax Revenue Bonds, Series 2004. And that is a revenue bond is something that you get to take out because you have revenue coming in to cover the cost of it. So that's where that $2 million will come in a revenue bond with the hopes that the hotel occupancy tax will cover that. And then they'll make up the difference, the rest of the $3 million they need to finish the project with some other kind of funding. And so again, the district itself is not a bond, but it will include a revenue bond. And the best thing I can compare this to is when the city decided to fund the construction of a hotel. They use revenue bonds, and they're using this hotel occupancy tax to pay for these revenue bonds. I don't like revenue bonds quite yet because I haven't found how to source them, and so it's a little bit of a gray area where I don't know where I can find the actual information on them, but I know they're there. So this one's a Series 2004. So that was the correction for that. More to come if I found out more information about that, but I just wanted to clarify that it is not, the proposition is just saying, hey, we're going to have this venue district, and then once the venue district's in place, they'll take out a bond in order to do some of the construction-ready projects they have they've lined out for us in previous. You can follow that at the venue district board meetings is how they're labeled if you're looking on the archived videos. All right, I think that's cleared up for now. I'm sure there'll be more corrections to come because I use lots of words and sometimes the words come out incorrectly, and I'm human. And so I'm just an average citizen, so I'm not going to always have the best speech, but I'm going to do my best to try and give you the most accurate information. All right, let's look at the week in review. There wasn't a whole lot going on last week, so there's not a lot to talk about, but the one thing I will clarify is the 911 district board met last week, and I was reminded when I saw I think the canceled email they send out after events are over, it said that it met at the South Branch of the library, and I was like, oh, that's right. They typically this board meets at the South Branch Library, which is pretty convenient to attend if you're over on that part of town. And I hope to attend that one day. I do think there's a lot more dynamic interaction going on between the county and the city to make sure our communications are good for the safety of our citizens. And I would like to know more about that. I just haven't got to go to the meeting, and they don't record those. So one day soon. Okay, moving along to the Board of Adjustments board meeting. I have paid attention to this one because I do think it's interesting to understand how the process works in our city when you have buildings that are a public nuisance and they're not being taken care of. So this one in particular struck my eye because they have pictures from last year or over a year ago and now, and there's no work being done. And so while the owner did show up and say, I'm just trying to get things done, there comes a point where the public nuisance and the inhabitability of the building has to take over. And I think part of it was the inability for the owner to actually be able to make any headway anytime in the near future. And it is hard. It is a fine line they have to walk in. And I've seen this board handle it very well, in my opinion, the tension that needs to be, that it needs to happen. So this building was condemned, but again, over a year, nothing has been done. So there is some consideration to be made for what it's doing to the neighborhood and the morale of that. And also just what is the owner able to do physically. It looks like this building is getting worse. And so they're going to move on to demolishing that building. And so there's a process to even do that. The second building I wanted to show you, I thought was really interesting. This building has had no utilities since January of 2019. And I think that's significant because here we go. This building was actually condemned originally in March of 1999, and through condemning it a second time, they discovered this. And so this has been in the cycle for a long time. And there's a lot of process has been made. I think this one went a little bit too far, but they're still dealing with it in the neighborhood. Can you imagine living in that neighborhood having to deal with this house that just won't get fixed? And it's important that as we grow as a community, we make sure we have these kind of things resolved so that we can have healthier neighborhoods that are more functional for all those who live in the area. The last place I wanted to show you on the agenda was a place that's been it's not as bad a situation as the other two, but the owner got up and said, hey, listen, everything's taken care of. I'm doing a great job. And this employee actually went by the place before the meeting today and said, actually, it's not been resolved. And even yesterday, there was still issues of people living in there that weren't supposed to be living in there. And so we have a lot of city employees who are doing a hard job of making sure things are followed up and giving information. And so I wanted to do a little shout out and just say, wow, I had no idea that they actually went and checked on these as vigorously as they did. And so being a part of this aspect of the community is something I did not know about. And so there is a process of getting our neighborhoods moving up to a better standard. And so we've just got to be diligent and make sure we're informed and paying attention to what goes on in our neighborhoods so that if something comes up at the Board of Adjustments, you can be a part of that conversation. Now we're going to move to my favorite meeting of the week, which is the City Council meeting. I really enjoy these meetings. There's a lot that happens. I get to learn a lot about the city through this process. And so I hope I can give you some helpful information to help you look forward to what goes on in city council meetings. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to get a council meeting moved to the evening, so that people who work or cannot make the 8:30 meetings can attend at least one council meeting a month, but that's going to be a process. So hang with me. So typically when you show up to a city council meeting, you can pick up an agenda, walk in, sit down, and begin looking to see what they're going to discuss today, which is what I did for quite a while. Until someone was kind and pointed out to me that there was actually an agenda packet that I could look at and find out more information. So what I thought was a lot of information on the agenda, it seems like they're giving me information. It really wasn't helpful until I started looking at the agenda packet, which is down. When you go to the agenda and meetings, wrong button. When you go to the agenda and minutes, that's what it is. You can look at the agenda, or there's the agenda packet. This one is pretty small. It's only 200 pages. Most of them are bigger than that. But what I wanted you to see is if you look on the consent agenda items, there's items 3 through 8. These were all passed on Thursday with one vote. Does everybody approve? Yep. Is there any discussion? Nope. And they just passed it. and you would have missed out on all this great information. And ironically, most of the information I'm sharing is from this section because I think there's a lot of things we can learn as citizens looking to make an impact. This first one is the appointment to various boards and commissions. So there are 5 boards that had new members appointed, and it wasn't discussed at the meeting. And so if you just look at the agenda, you see these and you're like, I don't even really understand what that means. And what I want to show you is if you go to the agenda packet, look, hey, there is a list of all those who were added to the boards this particular meeting or appointed to the boards. And so we have the 5 boards here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boards. And then what we can see, there's words next to these, and I'm learning what these words mean. We have 2 that were brand new to this particular board. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reappointments to these 3 boards. One of the things that I'm not sure what is a regular reappointment and what is a new reappointment. Right here we have it's not a new reappointment, a new appointment. So we have regular reappointment, regular new. And so was this not a regular one? These are the words I'm trying to understand why they're applied in some and why they're not applied to others. And so, for example, this one was a new appointment and now it's a regular moving to a regular spot. So where I will go to research is figure out, was this a new addition to the Board of Adjustments? Or is this an old spot that had a new person? There's no key. And so you just get to figure it out along the way. And then you can also see here the term end date is November 2025. So this is a new one. So this is, looks like it could be 2 years. And then we have 2026. Is 3-year appointments. And so again, unexpired term. So November 2024. So this must be a person appointed to a term that had unexpired, but they needed her in there. I'm not really sure. And so she'll have to be reappointed, I think, in November of 2024, if I'm understanding this right. But that's what you can understand if you look in the agenda packet. You can see who is being appointed to the boards, not just that there are people being appointed to the boards. The second thing I wanted to show you in the consent agenda item is this item number 6. I think it's really good when you're looking in the agenda packet, you find information that is not stated or shared and you're supposed to understand it. And as an average citizen, I don't understand a lot of this until I start to learn it. In each of the items on the agenda, they'll give different information in the packet. So we have general information, special considerations, funding, fiscal impact, staff recommendations. This one is for a motor grader for the streets division. And you can see here, it was provided by the Fleet Replacement Fund for a total of $283,000, almost $284,000. The funds for this purchase were planned and included in the FY24 budget. That means fiscal year 24 budget, which makes me happy. They budgeted for this. So that means they knew this expense was coming up. Unfortunately, this was $58,000 more, almost $59,000 more than they were anticipating, so it's over budget. And again, this isn't like a red flag. We're curious people trying to understand what all this information means. It means that rising cost, it probably costs more than what they're expecting. And so this is just something to notice and say, okay, that's the information we have. I just like to know when we're looking at stuff on the agenda, where that it just is something I'm making a mental note of so that when I look into other information, I can recall or come back to this source of information. And you may not know this, but I am an avid note taker and I love taking notes because it's amazing how my brain can remember that. So then there's just a few more items in this packet that you can look at. It's, just like the brand, the one that they're replacing, the cost to fix it, how many, like this says how many points on their scale of what needs to be fixed. And so if you have looked into or purchased what are they called? I forgot the name, motor grader for the streets, then you can find out probably more information than you thought you could find out. And you can be happy where the rest of us, these average citizens who don't know anything about this, will be like, that's interesting, but I'm glad it's there. If I knew what it was talking about, then I would probably appreciate it even more. Okay, moving to this next place. Anybody want some oceanfront property? Well, we don't have an ocean in Abilene, but you can have some lakefront property. They are selling some lots around Fort Phantom Lake, and I think there's 21 lots, and so that would be something fun for those of you who want to pursue that endeavor. But these are things that we don't get to talk about in the meeting because they just pass them, I guess, as administrative stuff. But to me, it's interesting, and I like to know more information about that. Moving on to the next thing is the election. I understand that everything we do costs money, and I think it's just important for us to understand the costs that we are spending, because the more we know, the more we can understand how these budgets work, how their expenses, how their revenues work, all those big fancy words that, aren't so hard to understand if you've engaged or interact at all in running a household, then you know those terms. So looking here, there are a total of 260,000 registered voters potentially participating in this year's election. And what I want to zoom in is down here, we have the Abilene-Taylor County Venue District proposition is going to cost $63,000. Taylor County is going to pay $63,000, and Abilene is only going to pay $32,000 for the expenses for the election. And then, of course, we have Wiley paying for their bond election, Merkel paying for their bond election, and Winters. And so you can see all the different costs. And again, it costs $208,000 for just the election alone, with all the materials, the workers, all the poll workers, the poll judges, all those different things. It has a cost. And so we pay for it. And, it's just information. And I thought it was important for you to know. The last thing I want to show you on the agenda for the meeting last week for the city council is this information about a concept plan that's happening for a self-storage building. And I thought this would be interesting for you to just make a mental note of. This is a parcel of land that they're wanting to build a self-storage building on. It's off of Loop 322. If you're looking at the video, it'll be right next to the fire station on Oldham Lane. And so there are the back of some residences here. And what I wanted to point out is they wanted to build this property. They asked for rezoning. They asked the neighbors how they felt about it within a certain radius. And some of them said, we're not excited about this kind of building here, or this kind of business here. And the project manager or whoever was representing the owner of this lot said, listen, we've heard from the neighbors. We want them to understand that we care about their opinions and what we do in their neighborhood. So we're going to be flexible and maybe change it to this, which would be a little bit more along the lines of what they're wanting. And I thought that was an interesting conversation, because sometimes we think that there's no point in us talking or sharing our thoughts. It doesn't matter. But here the neighbors said they wanted something different. Now, they weren't going to completely not do the business at all, but at least they responded and tried to make it more accommodating for those who live near this future business. And so our voices matter, and they make a difference. And I want everyone to understand that when you get a survey from the city, give your feedback and let them know, because that's the way they make the best decisions, is the more feedback they have. And I have never personally gotten one of those, but I know that they send them out quite frequently. And a lot of times people don't even respond. And to me, I understand that the city can only do so much to get people to respond, but it is up to us to make sure that we communicate when something's sent to us that we agree with it, or we don't agree with it, or we like it because of this, or we don't like it because of that, because those things do make a difference and make an impact. And depending on how many people respond and your response, it shows whether or not they have to pass it with just a few, 4 out of the 7 council approves it, or if 6 out of the 7 have to approve it. So your voice does matter in policies that happen within our city. So please make sure you participate, because they are listening when we respond. All right. I think that wraps up the week in review. We're going to go ahead now and shift to a week at a glance. There's a few meetings on the calendar this week. We can look here at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting is going to be happening on November 7th. The Betty Hardwick Center Board of Trustees is going to be happening on November 7th as well. The DCOA board meeting, which is the Development Corporation of Abilene board meeting, will be happening at City Hall on November 8th from 2 to 4. And then, and the time I prepared for this podcast and the time I'm recording this podcast, the Airport Development Board was canceled on November 8th from 3:30 to 5 p.m. And then lastly, we have the Keep Abilene Beautiful Board on November 8th from 4 to 5. I'm watching this one. I don't know if I'll continue to go I'll have to see because they are trying to move into a 5013C status, which moves away from being a public board through the city. So we'll have to watch. I wish they recorded it because it's just at a really rough time for me, but that's coming up this week. I think one of the best things we can develop is a healthy habit of checking the city calendar. And if you make sure that you are always looking once a week just to see what's going on, Fridays is a great day to look, or Saturdays is also a great day to look to plan out your week. I think we need to know what's going on. And if you're not going to go to the meetings, at least you can look to see which ones you want to come back for and see what they addressed and talked about, because we have to become more informed and educated, and the board and commissions meetings are a great place to get that information because they happen typically once a month, sometimes once a quarter, and sometimes once or twice a year. So let's start making a great habit of checking the calendar. If you don't want to check the calendar, you want to be super lazy, which is fine because I do both. I subscribe to the iCalendar and I get an email telling me when those meetings are happening so that I can at least have heads up. My favorite day is when they say, you have no events scheduled today. I did look to see what other events are happening in the city, but this is not a great location for that because the city only shows the boards and commissions meetings. It also only shows the city council meetings, city holidays, which is helpful, and then what happens at the convention center and library. So I don't have the information for parade, which I'd hoped to have for you because that needs to be a new source, which will be on my list of things to do for you. Because part of participating and making impact in our community is showing up to community events that are offered for the citizens. Now we'll talk about a few items I think will be important for you to be able to function better as you begin to make a greater impact in Abilene and the Big Country. And boards and commissions are an untapped resource that many of us don't really know about. I have learned for the last few months that is where a lot of things start. Obviously, we're not a part of the conversations that happen in private, but once they get to the boards, there are agendas that we can look at to see what they're discussing, to see if it's something of interest to us. And there are 27 boards in our city. And I've mentioned this before. You can find one of them that really piques an interest, dabble in a few of them and find which one you like best and just get started there. You don't have to attend. I mean, if every one of these 27 boards met an hour each month, that's 27 hours of board meetings you'd have to go through. And not a lot of us we don't all have that kind of time. And so I think it's great just to pick one and start just saying, this is going to be my jam. This is what I'm going to find out information for, and just start talking to other people and see who knows what's going on there. One of the things I have found very troubling about the boards is that there are not really an easy way to contact people on boards unless you personally know them. We have found reaching people in an attempt to communicate what's going on in the meetings beforehand and even afterhand, there has been very little to no response. And that's troubling to me as an average citizen. I have been watching and paying attention for the last few months of when do we get to join the boards? When do we apply for the boards? How do we know what's in queue for who's coming up? And there's really not a lot of information. I started looking into this last spring and began noticing when they would update. And so I came to this boards, commissions, contact, and vacancy report, which you'll see on the screen. And I noticed that they have all the boards listed, but there's really not a lot of information here. We do have the actual board person in charge that you can contact, but it's really not easy to find who's on the board and how active it is, because here we are in November and this one has only been updated since June 9th. And so this doesn't seem to be an active place to look for where you can fill in a gap or step up if there's a vacancy, because this is not very current. And that's troubling to me as an average citizen, that I don't have a current place to see where the vacancies are. Now, I have seen on some board meetings where someone has said, oh, I'm about to step down, I was going to talk to you, or, here's a new board member. And it's like, wow, where did that come from? It's a little overwhelming at times to know where to start. And so I also, on this page, if you go down to the bottom, there is a list of board members. And so I thought, well, this is good. I'll look there. Here's a list of all the different boards. But as you can see, it was updated June 9th. And I know that there's been a lot of change happening in the last few months on the boards. And it's hard to know who's on the boards. It's hard to know what vacancies are accurate when we're not keeping this accurate. And so this week when I noticed there were some board appointments happening, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know. And I attend these board meetings. This particular board meeting, every time I can go and I show up, and I know I have had friends who've applied to this board and they're not being picked, but yet now we have 4 people who have been, or I guess 3 people who have been appointed to this board, and not a word was said before it happened. So it's hard to encourage you to say get involved when you just have to apply. And so here is a application for applying, and my suggestion to you is apply, turn it in, and just see what happens. There's no rhyme or reason. Elections matter. The mayor is the one who actually approves board members. He gets the appointments made by staff, and our board chairpersons provide the mayor and council a list of people who have terms expiring. The functions or the summary of the board functions and staff recommendations for reappointments, a chart of makeup for each board, which that is another conversation for another day, prospective board members. And so it seems like the conversations happen behind the scenes. And so people who are not in the conversations with those on the board, it's hard to get appointed to the board. And so I don't think this is a hopeless situation, although right now it doesn't feel like there's a lot of movement for people who are not in connection with people already on the boards. I will say, for example, I will probably not be appointed to a board because of some of the positions I've taken. And so I have to just work with the board members already there. But we can continue to work and present our applications and email them or send them in person or walk them in person to the city secretary. But this is an important place for us to engage with, because this is where stuff happens. And if we want to make an impact, we got to start learning how to make an impact. And it starts with the boards and commissions. So with that being said, find a board that you want to get involved with and start getting to know the people on that board, and then apply, because you can offer a world of help to that board by just being an engaged and active community member. Now, your qualifications probably depend on which board it is. And I do know there are some positions that required an elected position to be filled, like, the county judge, he's on certain boards, or one of the councilmen are on certain boards. There are some of those places where it is limited to only elected officials, but there are a lot of different places for average citizens to get involved, and I would encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening to Just an Average Citizen podcast, the podcast created to help inform, educate, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. I would so appreciate it if you would subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family to help them be included in what's going on in our city. We have a website, justanaveragetitizen.com, which lists all the different platforms you can listen and or watch the podcast on. It would be great if you could scroll down to the bottom of the website and click the support button and contribute to what we're trying to do and how we're making an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. Until next time, you have a great week.